Rees-Mogg.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Chancellor concluded his remarks by saying he had looked up the Commons journals for 1760. He is, of course, a very modern man. I went a little bit earlier and looked up the Commons journals for 1575. And I should like to thank the Library for their assistance in helping me to find what I was looking for. I was looking for the behaviour of the House towards Mr. Peter Wentworth, a man who represented a Cornish seat and had the temerity to criticise the then sovereign Elizabeth I. He said, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." And for this prepared speech and divers offensive matters touching Her Majesty, he was taken prisoner to the Tower and held there for a month at the insistence of the House of Commons. And I must say, I think they knew how to behave in 1575, and it is a model for us today. But I want to come on to the point about who really owns the Crown Estates, because I think this is important in the discussion that we are having. And I would argue, and it's why, and I'm grateful to the Chancellor for taking my intervention, I intervened on the Chancellor's speech. It is important to remember that they are the property of the sovereign in an ultimate sense, though gifted for a reign. And the importance of this is that they therefore have a right to ask for money. Now, you may think that they would get the money anyway, but previously sovereigns have been promised money by Parliament, which then stopped. You just need to go back to Charles II, who handed over all his feudal dues to the government for £100,000 a year in perpetuity for him and all his heirs and successors. And I'm not sure that that £100,000 has been paid once in the last 300 and some odd years. So the Crown, by virtue of owning the Crown Estates, can guarantee that it is entitled to a revenue, and the fact that at the beginning of each new reign it could theoretically demand them back is important reassurance and reassertment of that
friend be kind enough to give way on that point. Is he conscious of the fact that at the time of the secret Treaty of Dover in the 1670, that the Crown would not recall Parliament because Louis XIV insisted that we should do what the French wanted and the rest of the Europeans wanted, in return for which he would give enough money to Charles II to keep him in with his mistresses and the royal household in the manner in which he felt he should be accustomed.
I do remember the secret Treaty of Dover well. I was not an active participant, but it's not particularly relevant to this debate, and it has to be borne in mind. It has to be borne in mind that Louis XIV didn't deliver the cash, which was always a slight problem in these sorts of negotiations. But the Crown Estate belongs to the sovereign. Any other great landowner who has inherited land owns that property outright and is free to pass it generation to generation. The Crown Estate is in this position, and I know we have discussed before whether because it's exempt from death duties or because it used to be used to pay for government expenditure, that it is therefore in some sense different in the nations. But I would argue that is not accurate, in exactly the same way as the feudal duties that fell upon other landowners were abolished as time went on, so the Crown Estates would in all normal circumstances have become the Queen's outright. So I go back to my point that the honourable gentleman, the member for Newport East, I think, dislikes, saying that the Queen pays an 85% tax rate, that it would be £200 million plus of income for the Queen every year, and in fact it's only going to be about 30. So Her Majesty is the highest taxpayer in this country. And members of Parliament might like to think that we could do a deal with the government and hand over our salary and be given £9,000 a year back. Of course I give way.
Would they recognise that there is a distinction between the monarch as an individual and the monarchy as an institution, and that the Crown Estates are owned or are the property of the state inasmuch as it's the monarchy as an institution and not the monarch as an individual, and therefore it is untrue to say that the monarch as an individual is paying 85% tax?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I think it's immeasurably confusing when you start trying to divide the Queen up in this way. Her Majesty is our sovereign, full stop. That she is one person, indivisible. She's not the Trinity. You know, Her Majesty the Queen, Her Majesty Mrs. Windsor, and Her Majesty the third party of the Trinity. It doesn't work like that. She is one sovereign individual. The next point I want to make is a point where I agree, as I often do actually, with the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, member for North Durham, on the question that we need to pay. I'm so sorry. It's in Her Majesty's gift, of course, to promote him, and perhaps she might look more favourably on that if he'd been a bit more loyal in his comments. But I do agree with the honourable gentleman in his point that we have to pay for the constitution that we have got. And the Queen is not here to bring in tourism and things like that. The Queen is here as an essential part of our constitution. And it's why it's worth the military taking on cost of sending attachés and so on and so forth, because the military owe their loyalty to the Crown and not to politicians and not to senior generals or people who could abuse that power to change how this country is run. And our constitutional settlement, which works extraordinarily well and has worked well for hundreds of years, is worth paying for. And it is on that basis, the stability that we get as a nation, the effective operation of our constitutional system, the judges who owe loyalty to the Crown, the military who owe loyalty to the Crown, us as members of Parliament who swear an oath to the Crown. It is the Crown that is at the pinnacle of our constitution, outside and above politics, and a defender of our liberties. And indeed, as Charles I said at the scaffold, he died the martyr of the people because he had been defending the liberties of the people, as the Queen has done now for jolly nearly 60 years. So in that constitutional settlement, we must be willing to pay the right price for it. And I think that should be a generous price. Of course I give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, my honourable friend. Would he take it from me, and would he agree with me, that the fact that each sovereign since 1760 has been asked by successive governments to sign over the proceeds of the Crown estate, that in and of itself is proof that the estate itself does not belong to the country, but actually to the person of the sovereign?
I think my honourable friend is, of course, right about this. And it is often said that Her Majesty is the golden thread that binds our nation together. And the key part of that phrase is the word golden. Her Majesty is not the cotton thread or the silver thread or the woolen thread. She is a golden thread that binds the nation together as one unique, great and noble nation. Oh, it's always an honour to give way.
I'm grateful for the honourable member giving way before he goes into hyper rant. Does he realise that this fantasy he's discussing now has been changed by the fact that honourable members who are forced, have no choice but to say an oath, many put a preamble to that oath which alters its meaning, and the decisions to go to war was changed when this House decided to vote on wars in 2003 and probably all future wars.
There's a completely separate question outside the remit of this debate on the prerogative powers. It has well been established that the prerogative can be bound by legislation, and legislation comes from this House. But that has very little to do with the Crown Estates and the financing of our sovereign, which is something that we should, as I was saying, do properly. And we then have the question of scrutiny and the Public Accounts Committee. Now, I make no bones about it. I think it's inelegant, ungallant and improper to look at every biscuit that Her Majesty wishes to buy. I think Her Majesty should have as many biscuits as she likes, and if they're chocolate Bath Olivers rather than rich tea, so be it. And I just don't think it's right for a committee of this House to be looking into it. But there is a risk, and my honourable friend, the member for Gainsborough, put this incredibly well, as he always does, about people using this for political advantage. Now, This may have changed because yesterday, sitting here, we suddenly discovered that all politicians now loathe the press and think that they are not worth dealing with. So my previous concern that members of the Public Accounts Committee might use investigating the monarchy to get publicity is clearly no longer true, because they so dislike the press that even to appear in the newspapers on the front page would be such an embarrassment that they will eschew the opportunity. However, times may change, and it is of serious concern to me that the Public Accounts Committee may spend time looking at the £35 million spent on the sovereign grant rather than the £6 billion that was wasted by the Ministry of Defence. And we really don't want to get into a situation where, because it is more appealing in terms of publicity, the Public Accounts Committee concentrates on something that is de minimis in the broader scheme of things. Let me conclude with Her Majesty's... Thank you. With the words of Her Majesty on her 21st birthday, when she said in South Africa, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of one great imperial family to which we all belong." Mr. Deputy Speaker, God save the Queen.